Okay, let's talk about Project Angel Food because I can't sleep. It was one of the worst jobs that I ever worked, and that includes the halfway house full of 70 plus women coming from jail and prison. So, let's start from the beginning. If you haven't seen any of my TikToks talking about Project Angel Food, it is a nonprofit that delivers nutritional and supplemental food for those who are in critical need in the Los Angeles area. I worked for them since I want to say 2001. I'll correct the dates here on the screen. But upon hire, I immediately knew that they were unorganized. I was invited to start on a date in which they were closed. And then the second date I was given, I arrived and was asked, "Oh, did you fill out the paperwork and stuff so you can actually start driving?" Because I was a delivery driver for the food. I was like, "No, this is my first day." They were expecting me to actually work, and I couldn't. So I had to go home. So another day I return. I was told to come a little bit later because the manager whom I was supposed to be speaking to shows up a little bit late. So I didn't show up right when they opened. I showed up probably a couple hours after. I get there and the manager gives me a disgruntled face. He's like, "Weren't you supposed to be here at such and such time?" I was like, "No, I wasn't given a certain time. I was just told to come in the morning." So I finally start because I need a job. I mean, who doesn't? I start working for them, me and a few other new people, because lo and behold, they're constantly hiring because they kind of suck with retention. We discover this one coworker whom had been there previous to us. And we can tell something is a bit off. He relentlessly jokes, but the kind of joking in which it doesn't click that he's not funny or he's inappropriate. For example, we were packing fruit, me and several other coworkers, and this particular one was making fun of another guy for wearing women's underwear. I know, right? Totally inappropriate, uncalled for, unethical. Nothing was done. And that wasn't the only incident. There was several incidences, and I never understood why my manager didn't do anything. But as you continue listening, they didn't do a lot of things about a lot of things. And then it came to the vans. Dirty, dirty vans. We didn't have them professionally cleaned till at least like 2 years after I had already been working. We got a different manager. And even then, right when she started, she delayed in even looking at the vans. Like she heard our complaints about how filthy they were and finally got into one a few months after she started and said, "Oh, yeah, yeah, they're dirty." They were so dirty that the steering wheels were sticky, because it was so hot that the rubber was like melting off. So dirty that you could take one wipe and it was like black. The back where the freezer was never cleaned, only the front. Nor were we given clear instructions on what temperature the freezer would be. Like, I'm a person who's perhaps a little bit OCD or on the spectrum. I need clear, precise, like visual instructions. There was a manager at one point who was going to give us a whole manual, like step by step. It never happened. Probably because he was fired for sleeping with a coworker. Yeah, I'll get to there. Anywho, the vans weren't at the correct temperature. They were dripping. The doors would fling open on a couple of the vans because the doors were broken. The vents for the freezers had sometimes mold. Manager should inspect or at least give us like an inspecting app in which we're inspecting the vehicles that we use every morning, like Amazon did. That would be better, but they didn't. After a year or so working there, they did get a app for the drivers. Previous, we were using our own cell phones. Yep, using our own personal cell phones to call clients and all that jazz. So a lot of people have my phone number. That didn't bother me. What bothered me was it was never publicly recorded, announced that two work cell phones that weren't unlocked because despite my best efforts in saying, hey, it's ethical to have these locked, and plus it's a HIPAA violation to not have them locked when there's personal information on cell phones, and they were stolen. Yep, because one coworker left their car unlocked while they went in to get coffee, and then another coworker left their vehicle unlocked and running when they were loading the van in the morning with the food. That second time, the van was stolen actually and stripped, I believe. It wasn't until several hours later where their cell phones shut down. That means for several hours, the public had access to personal clientele information: name, address. Yeah. Anyways, back to the vans. The vans, like I said, the doors would swing open sometimes. There was this one particular van in which I had to go rescue another coworker because it wasn't closing despite his best efforts. This actually was the same coworker who was harassed that I mentioned in regards to his clothing. So I went to go rescue him in my van, take all his food, and move into my van. But again, I wasn't shown the proper way how to close the door. So there was a couple times when I was driving and the door flung open and the food fell out. Yeah, there was a construction worker who even helped me pick it up one time. So let's go to how client services are organized. Each client service person has over 100 clients that they have to manage. Now, I understand this is different management from case manager. Still, there's a lot of paperwork. That's way too much per person. As a person who has studied nonprofit and supervision and all that jazz and ethics, whew, goodness, this place gave me a headache. I suggested several times that client services would sit in the same meetings as drivers so we could be on the same page, because there was always conflicts between us two. It's like client services would never pick up, or they didn't understand a client had passed away, or a client had to change a diet. Just a headache. And it wasn't just drivers that experienced the frustrations, but many clients I heard from, they'd be like, I can't reach them. I've called several times. I'm like, trust me, I know. One time, and it's not just one time that I called at least 5 times in a row and didn't get answered. But one particular time I had to deliver to a client who was an hour away from where I was. It's a clerical error of someone's. I was calling everyone, my managers, client services, to figure out, am I supposed to really go to this person that's an hour away from my route? No one picked up. And I later found out it's because everyone left the building because they thought that all the drivers were back or it wasn't that busy. So I ended up going to this client's place an hour away, and they weren't even there. There was another incident where I had to deliver to a new client that was inserted in my route at the last minute because how it's organized, you're only prepared for the next day, not for like a week in advance, it seems like. And this client, I understand, everyone at least gets meals, fruit, breakfast. The staple is the meals. This client was scheduled to only get a fruit bag. And I had so much hassle trying to reach this client, like go through a gate and everything, and they just got a fruit bag. I'm pretty sure they were disappointed too. It's like, what happened here? Then, in regards to the meals, when I started, right, there was, I think only like 4 different diets. Now they have probably 6 or more. Well, I had a client for the longest time who couldn't have any red meat. In the beginning, it was no beef, no pork. So they couldn't have either of those diets. They had to have vegetarian. The company kept giving me beef, I believe, or was it pork? It was one of those. And I kept on trying to tell them, hey, this is considered red meat. They put me on the phone with a nutritionist that they have at their other branch in New York. The nutritionist had the nerve to tell me, well, You know, they cut only the premium parts of the meat. It's the best part. They know what they're doing. You know, they've never considered one of those. I think it was pork, red meat, or something like that. I'm like, that's not what the Food Health Organization chart says. They're both red meats. What are you doing? There was several times I had to switch out the meals for this client because I don't know what Project Angel Food was thinking. My. And then comes the CEOs, right? Richard, the CEO, left a bad taste in my mouth within the first month I started when he addressed my manager, who African American, was sitting behind his desk. And the CEO was in front of his desk talking to him, right? And I could hear this conversation a table or so away while I'm packing fruit. The CEO is asking my manager why we haven't switched from the white coolers, foam coolers that we used when I began, to the blue bags, which we don't use anymore. I don't know, they may have went back to it, but for last year they weren't using it. He's like, look at me when I'm talking to you. It's like, boy, what in the world? This is a manager talking to another manager, not a manager talking to a child. My goodness, I couldn't believe it. So let's go to the manager who slept with coworkers. We had a manager who was an older man named Robert. Okay. He was flirtatious with some of the staff. And it was rumored, allegedly, that he was gifting very expensive gifts to the girl who was in charge of our dispatching routes or something like that. She eventually had to get another job and left after a few months. So he started flirting with another staff member whom was married to a guy who worked in the kitchen. I know that they had an affair because I saw pictures of them in Vegas. Ugh, so much drama, so much drama. I had an issue with this one fellow who, what I'm going to share next is little compared to the crime he committed. But I would get so annoyed with this guy because he would say that where we stood right after my manager's office, we had to wear hairnets and gloves and all the 9 yards, in which they had to for kitchen, because kitchen was right after that. It was always a hassle and fight on where exactly does the kitchen start, where exactly do we have to impose the rule of wearing hairnets and gloves. Now I packed fruit, okay? Pears, apples, oranges, nothing else open or whatever. Never did we wash them or whatever, just put them in a bag and then a bins in which were never cleaned, although the manager bought supplies but never taught us. So I would get in tizzies with this guy. None of my managers would tell me, just this one kitchen guy. Anywho, this creep, he got fired on the DL and got severance pay after it finally got out that he sexually assaulted a minor who was an immigrant. Now, our job has a lot of volunteers that come, and one of the volunteers was this minor who received inappropriate text messages from this main chef. This guy also was harassing other staff members. There's tons of evidence of him sending messages to this other staff member and threatening her, so on. And yet he got a severance pay. Was it reported to the police? No. The mother of the minor came in, bawling, upset, rightly so, and must have been talked out of reporting because they left and their demeanor was changed. Nothing was done. We fought for a union while I was there. It wasn't the first time Project Angel Food did. They apparently fought for one when the founder was there. Well, we fought for a union. Of course, the CEO and HR hosted meetings in which they told us unions are bad, they cost money, we can handle our own problems. The CEO directly was saying, like, oh, ask too much money of you or something like that. And the guy who was trying to spur on the union movement, he's like, "You're lying. You're not supposed to say this. What are you doing?" Like, his demeanor was very fearsome that I think it did scare staff. Unfortunately, we lost the vote and the guy left, or maybe was asked to leave. I despised our HR. He came across as a manipulative, lying, uncaring man. I was hospitalized due to partially collapsing a lung a couple of years ago, and I reached out to my work immediately, letting know the disposition. And I had previously paid for disability. I wasn't led on how to carry that out, on what paperwork or website I had to go to. This was new to me. Although I was in the hospital only for the overnight, I still missed a few days of work. It may have been a week. When I got back, still no guidance. I was expecting maybe the disability check just comes in then? No. Despite emails and texts, and I ended that week with no check. And I'm a person who lives paycheck to paycheck. I am in severe debt. And because of this, I couldn't pay many things. I was so upset at HR that when I finally met with them, say, "Hey, what's up? I was expecting money. I didn't get paid." Basically, such a fucking gaslighter, put the problem on me. And he's like, you know, "You're the one getting upset. If you weren't so upset, we could like proceed or something like that." Because I had messed up my email or his link to sign in for the disability paperwork. I was shaking because I was so mad because this man I felt was so prideful and not apologizing for his failure in guiding me like an HR should. I was so upset. I reached out to many lawyers, the Attorney General of California. Nothing was done. I mean, I don't have money to pursue justice, and thus I have videos. Project Angel Food went through a process of construction in which we had to move temporarily to different buildings. The kitchen and offices were separated. And during this time, they didn't have the proper storage for leftover meals from when drivers come back. So we were directed to throw away the leftover meals. Yes, again, this is a food nonprofit. We were told to first dump them off in dumpsters and where, people can't see. Coworkers were like, "Well, people can still see. They'll probably still see us because we have our logos on everything." So we were told then to dump them in the trash can in the office and then take them to the dumpster that's locked behind the office. They were never counted on how many meals they wasted. There was one time I came and I wanted to throw away the whole bag of food because a milk jug was leaking. I took my time and patience and I cleaned everything and threw away the milk and I saved the other food because they weren't damaged, they were packaged. I come to the office the next morning to find out all the leftover food. They just had a normal freezer was packed and another mini fridge was packed of food. All of it was being tossed because somehow freezer door was open and so that was spoiled. And they tossed the non-perishable food that I had cleaned away as well, even though none of that was refrigerated. That was just one instance, but I'm pretty sure there was plenty of times in which we threw away non-perishable food in which we didn't have to. Such poor organization, like I said. Things were just planned for the following day, not in a week in advance. And so whenever drivers wanted to take a day off, it was a whole hoopla. Rarely did we get as many days off as client services or the rest of the office because we were told people have to eat. We were directly told by the manager, if we called off, then we're basically saying a person doesn't have to eat that day. Talk about manipulation, right? I remember too getting employee reviews the year I went to the ER at least 5 or 6 times. And they had the nerve to say, hey, you need to work on your health, so you're here more. Okay. So we get a new manager after the one manager is fired for sleeping with the coworkers, finally, even though we had seen it going on for at least a year or more. Oh, he was also fired because he was supposed to be keeping record of all the food that went in and out of the freezer, and he didn't. He was just a slacker in general. He also made an inappropriate remark in front of 3 or 4 different staff, joking and saying, I'll give you $1 if you dance for me, to another older woman. I've witnessed people faking injuries to claim health insurance. I've seen people run their hands through their hair and then put their hands in the cereal they were packing. I've seen feathers still in the cooked chicken. It was so good when I started there. Like, the food was amazing. I remember the first employee meeting, they bought everyone lottery tickets. Now that I think of it, though, it's just a waste of money because I don't think any of us won. But then the quality went down, and that's how we end up with feathers in our chicken a few times. I made my manager cry because the biggest conflict she had with me was wearing a midriff. So I was never addressed that my clothing was an issue. It was always a laxed place, felt more like volunteer work than actual job. But once we got this new manager, after the guy was fired, she had a problem with me knotting the corner of my shirts. I worked on dispatch side. A lot of times there was less volunteers there than in the kitchen where they were more needed. But I remember the day she addressed me when I was making the routes, lifting, and so my shirt got up a little bit more, and she's like, hey, you need to undo your knot there and cover up your shirt. There was another time I complimented her on her outfit, and I was carrying something, and then the minute after, she's like, hey, you need a new shirt or whatever. It's like, I was lifting something. I didn't think it was a big deal because, again, no one else from management had addressed me about it. It was a lax place. I didn't work with open food. I delivered frozen food. At one time, I even saw her trying to see how short my skirt was. I unfortunately got written up for it because they came up with a new dress code, new handbook that everyone had to sign, in which I remember HR standing with all the drivers in the parking lot, and I asked him, hey, is the dress code that kitchen has to follow the same for the drivers? And he said no. And I was like, well, that's not what other management says, because they just put up a sign saying everyone has to look like, this. No jewelry, no midriff, which I felt like was targeted. No sandals, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, oh, really? And he went to go see the sign that they just put up. When I got written up and I had to sit in the office with HR and the supervisor, and I recalled that story, he tried gaslighting me and saying, no, I know exactly what the rules are. I helped write the rules. I just need to know why the sign was up early or something like that. Okay, dude. Well, my manager who wrote me up almost cried because she felt like I acted like I knew everything or didn't know what was going on behind the scenes, because I had wrote a long response on my write-up saying, why is this such a big deal, and not things like the sexual assault a big deal. They're like, sexual assault? What's that? Is there something you want to talk to us about? No, I don't trust you. I'm not talking to you about it. They're the ones who covered it up. Why are you going to listen to me now, a year after the fact? The guy in which sexual assaulted this minor, he works at another kitchen, by the way. So I ended up leaving Project Angel Food because I was suspended for 3 days due to wearing a tank top by a new manager that started, whom I wouldn't be surprised communicated with the supervisor who didn't like me. The supervisor who didn't like me, she actually reviewed cameras for a week to see my outfits because she was rarely there. And she even asked coworkers what I was wearing. I don't know if that was to get back at me because I had done a quick survey asking coworkers if they knew about a dress code, if my outfits made them uncomfortable. I did this survey. It was like only like I said, 3 or 5 questions. It didn't last more than a couple minutes, and it was anonymous. I didn't write down people's names, and I made it on a spreadsheet and I sent it to my manager to prove a point that communication sucks there. And she had the nerve to tell me to stop bothering my coworkers and basically stop taking them away from the task. And we were always done with what needed to be done. Like, we worked our asses off, but the manager was rarely there. I think she was one of those people who was upstairs, in the offices and came downstairs to try to organize things without actually understanding the people. There was one time when she wanted to organize the freezers and put poles, these wood little poles on each like metal cart and with flags so we know like which ones to rotate because they always sucked at rotating the new and the old food. It was never even communicated with kitchen staff about all the changes. The sticks fell off anyway, or they weren't long or short enough, whatever. Ended up Xing that plan after a week or so. The same with ironing these patches on the blue totes. I said the CEO was angry that we didn't have in time. These patches were a logo from a foundation that gave us money and they want, their name displayed. I don't know whose idea it was to iron every one of those totes without doing a trial and error process, but all those patches fell off because we put those in the freezer. And it's like vinyl, or you can't put a patch on top of vinyl in a freezer? Nah. And those bags were gross too. I have a picture of a cockroach in one. There was worms or maggots by the dumpster we loaded food by every morning for the last year at the new place that we had to temporarily have our kitchen at. We were told we were going to have a loading team. That fell through too. It just ended up being staff being overworked, helping us load. Good times, good times. Like I said, it was probably one of the worst jobs I've ever worked. Which is sad because in the beginning I thought it was one of the best.